talk about victimizing the victim. Viva Frei Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and Nick Sandmann, for those of you who don't know who he is back in the news. And if you don't know who Nick Sandmann is,
I don't know what to tell you.
Nick Sandmann, aka the Covington Catholic kid, aka the MAGA hat wearing kid, aka the kid who was slandered and libeled by the media back in 2019 to the point where he had to sue the Washington Post, CNN, and 8 other media outlets for defamation.
That Nicholas Sandmann.
Now, I have been vlogging on the Sandmann defamation suit for over a year now. I've done, I suspect, at least a dozen videos tracking this lawsuit from the original claim to the motions to dismiss to the settlements and more. And while Nicholas Sandmann has settled 2 of his defamation lawsuits, that being one against CNN and the other against the Washington Post, he still has multiple other defamation lawsuits against the mainstream media pending. But Nicholas Sandmann is back in the news, and not because of his settlement with CNN or the Washington Post, not because of his defamation lawsuit, not even because he was a speaker at the Republican National Convention, but because of what is going on at the university that he was just admitted to, Transylvania University. Now, let me just preface this vlog for full transparency. I think Nicholas Sandmann was a victim, period, full stop. If you think that makes me biased, if you think that taints my interpretation of the circumstances, that is fine. You are entitled to your opinion. I don't think I'm biased. I think I'm just educated. I come to that conclusion after hours and hours and hours of research. When I look back on that now infamous picture, despite the reaction I had at the time, I don't see a smug with a smirk on his face. I see a young kid who just didn't know what to do. After having read the initial reports of what happened, after having seen how this kid got his name dragged through the mud, got slandered, got threats, had his life basically turned upside down, I have no problem saying that I think he was the victim. And with that said, I say in life there are 2 kinds of people. There are those who are able to admit their mistakes and apologize for them, and there are those who refuse to admit their mistake and instead double down, triple down, quadruple down, whatever, refuse to admit they made a mistake.
Double down. What?
You know what? There's actually a 3rd group of people, those who, in doing number 2, also go back to victimize the victim. Nick Sandmann gave a speech at the RNC 2020 campaign where he took pride in his conservative beliefs. He was hired by Mitch McConnell's re-election campaign for 2020, and he was admitted to Transylvania University, which apparently upset certain people. Now, this entire story has been thoroughly reported on by Professor Jonathan Turley, and if that name rings a bell, it's because you might remember Jonathan Turley as the constitutional experts in such vlogs as the impeachment of Donald Trump.
How does this trend comport with how the founders understood impeachment should operate?
Well, I believe that the founders certainly had aspirations that we would come together as a people, but they didn't have any delusions. It certainly was not something that they achieved in their own lifetime.
I will include a link to Professor Turley's blog on the subject in the pinned comment below, and Tim Pool also did a great video on the subject. And who might actually be taking issue with the fact that Transylvania University accepted Nick Sandmann, you might be asking yourself? Well, none other than ACLU staffer Samuel Crenshaw. And for those of you who may not know who or what the ACLU is, it is the American Civil Liberties Union, and Wikipedia describes it as follows. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, is a non-profit organization founded in 1920, quote, to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties guaranteed to every person in this country by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, end quote. Officially nonpartisan, the organization has been supported and criticized by liberal and conservative organizations alike. Now, a lot of people have their doubts about the political neutrality of the ACLU, including Jonathan Turley himself. I have previously written as a long supporter of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, about my concern over how the venerable group has changed under its current leadership, including a departure from its long, robust defense of free speech. Recently, the ACLU has abandoned its feigned neutrality and has not supported some on the right while supporting those on the left. Now, the ACLU's Samuel Crenshaw in Kentucky has targeted Transylvania University for admitting Nick Sandmann, who was falsely accused of abusing a Native American activist in front of Lincoln Memorial. Now, in fairness to the ACLU, it does seem that Samuel Crenshaw is not acting in his formal capacity as an ACLU representative, but rather in his own name, as can be seen from his Twitter account and an edited note in his Facebook comment, which is at the heart of this vlog. The screenshot of the impugned Facebook post that appeared in Jonathan Turley's article does not include a note that now appears in Samuel Crenshaw's Facebook post, but let's just go ahead and read the post, including the note. Note, these are my personal views that I am expressing on my personal Facebook page on my personal time. They do not necessarily reflect the views of my current or past employers. I have a First Amendment right to express my views just as Nick Sandmann has a First Amendment right to express his. I will continue to express my views on my personal time. And now to the original message as appears in Jonathan Turley's article. Does anyone else think it's a bit of a stain on Transylvania University for accepting Nick Sandmann. I'm sure it's a, quote, both sides, end quote, defense, but it's pretty counter to their mission and another instance of there not actually being equal sides to an issue. I think TU should accept anyone willing to have an open mind and engage in debate, regardless of their views. That's how we all learn. That's Transy's mission. And to borrow a concept from Scott Adams, now is when the mind reading begins. But this kid clearly is a provocateur in training with no intention of learning. He exists only to troll, intimidate, and play victim. Says the guy who was quite literally intimidating while playing the victim, and it reminds me of the great expression, when you point a finger at someone, there are three pointing right back at you, but it gets even better in his post. He and his attorney proudly use their national platforms to promote QAnon, which has literally been the direct cause of multiple instances of violence. And it goes on, and I will let you read it to yourselves. And crying victim while he lashes out to the very end, Samuel Crenshaw ends with a rather self-praising statement. Having experienced the incredibly high standards Transy requires for admission and then holds its students to, this seems like a slap in the face. And then back to some mind reading. I hope sometime in a real classroom changes him, but his Twitter and public persona suggest otherwise. Now, it's one thing for a private citizen like Samuel Crenshaw to make a public post like this on his own personal time, but who should respond positively to that post? None other than an assistant professor and diversity scholar at Transylvania University, Dr. Avery Tompkins. And what Dr. Tompkins responded will blow your mind.
I swear my mind blows my mind. Incredible.
While I certainly don't support or agree with his views and find his public behavior and rhetoric atrocious and uninformed, we can't not admit academically qualified students due to their political and personal views. If he ends up in my intro class, fine, he might learn something that is actually based on research and evidence. And because everybody seems to be a mind reader these days, I'm well aware of the anti-intellectualist views tied to the organizations he's a part of, so I assume he'd view me as part of some liberal brainwashing machine, but signing up for Transy and my class means he is required to learn that information even if he disagrees. If he were to cause problems by being disruptive, trolling, or engaging in unethical behavior of any kind, I would immediately document it, just like I would for any student doing the same thing, and he would just be putting himself in a position for me to file a conduct report. So as far as I know, there have been no issues thus far, though I could certainly be missing info. That said, I totally get where you're coming from. I'm interested in knowing why he chose Transy, whose mission is the antithesis of what he believes and promotes. In his article, Jonathan Turley says that he reached out to Transylvania University, and they did in fact provide a response, the most relevant part of which reads as follows. There are two things that, as a university, we are not able to discuss: our students without their permission and personnel matters. In response to posts on social media and other websites over the Labor Day weekend, we reiterate that point. A review of the situation will be conducted expeditiously by the appropriate university officials. And then what followed from that is your typical non-apology apology from Professor Tompkins. I want to apologize for my mistake in singling out a student and any misunderstanding that arose from that. Tompkins' mistake in what he said as a representative of Transylvania University was not in what he said, but only in the fact that he singled out Nicholas Sandmann by name when he said it. Let that sink in while we read the second part of the apology. One of my favorite things about working at a liberal arts institution is that the university community has diverse perspectives. All students, faculty, and staff are able to engage in civil discourse with those whose views may be different from their own and to learn about those views in an academic setting. I value and support these conversations with students, and I know that students value these conversations with their peers as well. Except if you espouse views that differ from my own.
You're suspect.
And we're watching you. With liberal arts like that, who needs tyrannical arts? And for anybody who may not be familiar with Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, and full disclosure, I've never actually read the book, I've only read the synopsis online. Rule number 13.
Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it.
Well played. Well played. But I actually want to get to one comment in particular that I saw in response to Samuel Crenshaw's initial post, because after all, this is a vlog and there has to be some law in it.
Hope he sues you!
And when I first read about this, but before I saw that response to the Facebook post, I did go to Twitter, and if you don't follow me on Twitter, go to Twitter. I occasionally say non-dumb things, and this was the non-dumb thing I said on this situation. The Nick Sandmann versus CNN Washington Post AL lawsuits taught us about defamation. The potential Sandmann versus ACLU AL lawsuits might teach us about tortious interference with contracts. Now, I made that tweet sort of tongue-in-cheek because I don't think we have the essential elements there just yet, but we are not that far off, and by way of example, just recall what happened in the Gibson's Bakery versus Oberlin College lawsuit. In that case, which I also did a live stream on, Oberlin College labeled Gibson's Bakery racist because of an incident that occurred in the bakery. Not only did they call them racist, but they encouraged others to boycott Gibson's Bakery. Gibson's Bakery sued Oberlin College for damages resulting from tortious business interference, and they actually were awarded $44 million in damages, subsequently reduced to $25 million in damages, and I believe Oberlin appealed the amount, but I don't think there's been any news on that front just yet. And so here I am, lawyer for life, sitting here thinking to myself that Samuel Crenshaw, a third party, is effectively trying to interfere with the contract between Nicholas Sandmann and Transylvania University, calling him all sorts of names, making all sorts of accusations and innuendos, suggesting that Transylvania U should not have admitted him as a student. And just for your own edification, what are the conditions of application of the concept of tortious interference? According to the American Bar Association, a defendant is subject to liability for interference with contract if A. a valid contract existed between the plaintiff and a third party, B. the defendant engaged in wrongful conduct as defined in subsection 2, C. the defendant intended to cause a breach of the plaintiff's contract or disruption of its performance, and D. the defendant's wrongful conduct caused a breach of the contract or disruption of performance. Subsection 2, conduct is wrongful for purposes of this section if A. the defendant acted for the purpose of appropriating the benefits of the plaintiff's contract, or B. the defendant's conduct constituted an independent and intentional legal wrong, or C. the defendant engaged in the conduct for the sole purpose of injuring the plaintiff. Now, there are a whole slew of defenses here: free speech, the fact that there hasn't actually been any damages sustained. It looks like Transylvania University is going to honor its contract with Nicholas Sandmann, but we are getting kind of close to danger zone. Some cynical people might get the impression that what Samuel Crenshaw actually wanted was for Transylvania University to kick Nicholas Sandmann out. Some skeptical, cynical people out there. Others might get the impression that the professor within the university is going to create a situation that would result in the same outcome. At the very least, some people might just consider this to be targeted harassment. Nick Sandmann has been through quite enough over the last year and a half, and even if you vehemently disagree with his political or ideological views, I think it is time to leave Nick Sandmann alone.
Leave Brittany alone!
And if you're not going to leave Nick Sandmann alone out of the goodness of your own heart, maybe the potential legal ramifications will be something of an extra deterrent. We will see where this goes. I suspect it's going to go nowhere. It looks like Transylvania University is putting its foot down, and it's not going to follow in the footsteps of Oberlin College. But with that said, if you like my videos and you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm. If you want to support the channel, all of the support links are in the pinned comment. We've got PayPal, Subscribestar, YouTube membership, merch if you want to get some merch to support the channel. But above all else, take care of yourselves, check in on friends and family, make sure everyone around you is doing well, and now you know your vlog. Peace out. Booyah.